mutually introduce this group of people to Representative Foster and Representative Foster to this group to kick it off.
Okay, I guess I have to start out by apologizing to my staff who's gotten these prepared remarks, but somehow I just can't stay unscripted. I sometimes introduce myself as saying that I represent 100% of the strategic reserve of physicists in the United States. So I'm actually the only PhD scientist in this joint. But then I also am chairing a task force on artificial intelligence for the financial services, so I sometimes introduce myself as saying that I'm the only AI programmer in Congress. But in this group, I think I will identify myself as the only G-code programmer for those of you who actually have struggled with that. It's one of the more archaic language. It probably predated COBOL.
We're killing it off, finally.
You're killing it off.
Yes.
All right. But those old machines that you have with your company. Anyway, but it's because when my daughter was still in grade school, I went in and got one of these mill drill conversion kits that ran off some 286 PC, and I would actually eat G-code and move it around, which she then proceeded to use to get big blocks of pink styrofoam and build castles, which she designed on graph paper and figure out all the tool paths to make these things. And and this is a sort of she's now gone up in greener pastures. She's doing healthcare analytics. Well, she married a guy who was a year ahead of her at Stanford, is now back in Boston doing healthcare data analytics for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, having this background and just sitting there and thinking about building stuff and the inevitable tie to the mathematics of the design process is something that is, it's capital chess in training kids' brains to actually just think carefully and to focus, especially in an age when they are all suffering from, as we all are, from the attention deficit disorder of cell phones. That just, and so I think that part of it, just the educational aspects alone are probably the first biggest reason I fell in love with Fab Labs as a concept. But also the fact that they can be a bridge toward startup businesses. This is also something that I was under-resourced in. When I was 19, my little brother and I started a company in our basement using non-automated machine tools. The company now makes about 70% of all the theater lighting equipment in the U.S. So it's, we're 90% of the lights on Broadway, 50% of touring rock and roll, 70% of churches, schools, community theaters, and so on. And we've kept all that manufacturing in the United States with the Midwest, which is something I'm very proud of. But we didn't, our company didn't have any kind of support. We had ideas on how we build stuff and very crude, the sort of stuff you have in the basement of a normal suburban house. And had we, all of the mechanical part of what we had to prototype was just done, by hand in a very crude way. And had we had the infrastructure that you get with a Fab Lab, where you could just pull down the designs that you could modify from the web and so on, a lot of what we did would have been, just gone much faster and been much more productive. And then maybe we wouldn't have come so close to going bankrupt as many times as we did. Which is, but it's the whole business of starting a business is, it's just a wonderful experience that there's not enough of. We struggle on both sides of the aisle, and Congress trying to understand why the number of startups are actually dropping in this country. This is it's a huge problem because we've traditionally been one of the real engines. And I think part of the solution to that is just getting the right kind of equipment in the hands of young kids and entrepreneurs. And that's what's really neat about this. I was happy to hear that it appears as though the exponential growth of this enterprise, that I guess you'll be hearing about by slide number 4 in your presentation, is still on track. And then that's why why I'm proud to be the co-sponsor along with Thomas Massey, who is a gentleman with whom I agree about approximately nothing, except that we're both enthusiasts about the Fab Lab Network and the way that Congress can show its support and backing this, because if you look at, the struggles of some of the old organizations like, Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or Danger went bankrupt these days, a lot of the old organizations that supplied such a wonderful connection between parents and their kids is now can be replaced by things like this, where you have a wonderful new way for kids to connect to mentors and the real world. So I just, I can't say how much I respect what is done by Neil and by Sherry and everyone who contributed to this. And I also have to apologize that I have to take off and won't be able to hear all the wonderful stories, but my staff, Gary, say hi, Gary.
Hello.
He's the guy that carries the water and does all of the, the person who's pushing to get this over the line is something that actually passes the house design on the inside, because there's no reason that it should have been done a while ago, and we're being optimistic. So anyway, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Bill. And along with what's going to happen in the room, we're recording all of this event to have a log for posterity for what this follows. And I'd really like to underscore Representative Foster's comment that given all of the current tensions over rural versus urban, red, blue, north, south, this is just this amazing issue that crosses all of them. That just, for me, it's a really important moment to be doing this. So what we're going to do now is we have an hour to take a tour of the impact, need, and opportunity. And then for those with stamina, there'll be time afterwards for discussion. And then once again, this will all turn into a video of the event we can share afterwards. So we're going to have a brisk 5-minute pace that'll hold everybody to. I'm Neil Gershenfeld. I direct Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, where we started this Fab Lab Network. This is an article I wrote with my brother Joel, you'll hear from, and brother Alan. And on balance, I don't know if I recommend writing a book with your brothers.
Thank you.
But it was actually a pleasure to do, about the political impact of digital fabrication and how it changes so many of the assumptions at the heart of politics. So to look at scaling, 1 Earth, 1,000 cities, 1 million towns, 1 billion people, 1 trillion things. This was the first real-time computer the world went at MIT. There was one of those. There were thousands of mini computers. This was used to invent the internet. Millions of hobbyist computers. This was used to invent Microsoft and Apple. Billions of personal computers, and now we're in the era of trillions of Internet of Things. MIT invented computerized manufacturing in 1952. There was one of those. Today, there's thousands of Fab Labs that you'll hear about. They're like the mini computers. It's leading to work I won't talk about on machines making machines and assemblers and self-assemblers. And that technology is scaling in the same way, from 1 to 1,000 to 1 million to 1 billion to 1 trillion. And so eventually everybody will have access to this in the same way that the thermostat has the same power as the mainframe computer. But right now we're at this very important moment. We're at this historical moment, and this is when email, the video games, internet, all of that was invented. You don't need to wait for this to be finished to see the opportunity and crucially to shape the opportunity. So for outreach for the National Science Foundation, Sherry and I and colleagues set up a mini version of the lab at MIT. The lab at MIT has the successors to the $1 million machines. And then it's doing research on how to make almost anything. And so we put together a small version. This is, in this current form, it's 2 tons, $100,000. It fills a room. This is at a small volcanic island off the coast of Iceland. It has a 3D printer you might have heard a lot about, but crucially it has all the other things, the 9 other machines you need to turn data into things and things into data. So with all of this, you can make all of that: boats, bicycles, furniture, consumer electronics, aquaponics, urban data networks. One of the most interesting things you can do is make more machines, so labs can make labs. And we set up one of them for the NSF, that led to a second, and then we started doubling. So this is the current world map of them. You might have heard of Moore's law, the scaling law behind digital revolution. He plotted 5 data points on a log plot they lined up. It was these. He said, what if that goes for a decade? The mistake he made was only one mistake. It went for 50 years. And so this is 50 years of Moore's Law. It began rolling off around 2015. This is Fab Labs. We've come to call it Lass's Law because Sherry has many skills, but keeping a neat desk is not one of them. And so she had a pile of paper saying, I want a Fab Lab. And the pile of paper started doubling every year. And so we started measuring, and we saw the Fab Labs have been doubling for more than a decade. And so what makes sense at this point is to take seriously what if this scales for the next 50 years. And so to keep up, we've had to create a number of organizations, a nonprofit Fab Foundation for operational capacity, a Fab Academy to do distributed education wherever people are, a Fab Labs IO portal to organize, to support the community. And that's led to things like this. This was a lab we ran at the White House in the Obama administration. This is Barcelona's mayor. Fabulous design sense, but over 40% youth unemployment. A whole generation can't work as we understand it. My colleague became the city planner, and they started an initiative to set up the labs everywhere in the city as urban infrastructure. In the same way the city provides access to clean water or electricity, it's providing access to the means to make. You could do it as a business, or you could just make something, fundamentally changing the economy of the city. This is starting a 40-year countdown, and all of these cities have signed this Barcelona commitment. They're all on the same schedule to make this transition from consumption to creation, urban self-sufficiency through access to the means to make. And so that, in turn, inspired the legislation this session is about. This bill is to charter a national Fab Lab network. There's enormous unmet demand. And rather than appropriating it or putting it in an agency that's sensitive at multiple levels, it's to endorse it in the national interest as a public-private partnership to have universal access to digital fabrication. In the same way that we now take that for granted for computing or communications, it's to take the boundary between digital and physical and turn consumers into creators able to cross that. And it fundamentally changes just about everything about how an economy functions, how a society functions. So that's the bill we're here to talk about. What we're going to do now is go through a series of 5-minute vignettes of remarkable people in remarkable places telling the stories about the impact and need, and then we'll end with a conversation. So I'm delighted to introduce Gloria.
Representative Pastor, I'm going to throw away my notes. I only need even here for a quote. It's so nice to be presenting to you all today. I enjoyed our time last year when we were in the Senate as well to share our story and to tell you why a tribal nonprofit organization whose mission is to connect Alaska Native people to a potential through partnership, why we've made such an investment in the Fab Labs. So just to give you a bit of context, we're one of the largest tribal nonprofit providers in the state. We serve about 12,000 people on an average basis, or an annual basis. We connect families who are really struggling and are vulnerable and at risk to ensure that they have opportunities so that they have the ability to gain stability. We connect individuals who are recovering from alcohol and drugs, and we walk with them in the recovery journey. We also connect individuals to career opportunities and to jobs across the state of Alaska. And probably one of our most important investments is education. We really believe education is the greatest equalizer. And so this is why we have made this investment in the Fab Lab. So why do we say Alaskans, we may be one of the first makers? I'm sure that many other cultures can claim this. But as you know, Alaska is a beautiful yet harsh climate, and our people have thrived within our communities and on the land for the last 10,000 years. And so we've had to be innovative, we've had to be resilient in our spirit. And as we think about the last 100 years of Alaska's journey with traditional systems and knowing who we are and how we've lived off the land over the last 10,000 years, we've really struggled because a big part of the education system has left us behind. It has left this idea that we're multidimensional people, that it's truly embedded in our DNA. And that's why the Fab Lab investment has been so very important to ensuring that our students have access to educational opportunities, access to STEM learning, and real access to live anywhere they desire in this world and have the skill and ability to do it. And in aligning not only who we are, but also our growing resource base and becoming leaders in the conversation around education and how that's changing within our state. So just briefly, since our partnership with MIT in 2013, we have been able to connect to at least 3,000 youth on an average basis. We make investments both in and out of school programs. And as you can see that in FY19, we served approximately 2,000 youth through our Fab Lab activities. Within the operations of our Fab Lab, it's really important to us that we put the people at the center so that we create deep and meaningful partnerships along with this hands-on learning. As a result of the investment, students have come to us and asked us to expand what we have going on. We realize that this is such an incredible opportunity. It's helped our young people graduate from high school. It's created a network for those young people to see a future that they might not have seen originally. And it's also allowed CITC to step into the leadership role of how education is changing in our state. In addition to that, we are connecting to communities across the state of Alaska. We have embedded the Fab Lab model into our longstanding trust relationship with the federal government. And so what that means is now that we are funding all of our Fab Lab activities in a very holistic way within our budget system. And lastly, our board really feels that as we move and make this leap from sustainability, that we move and say, hey, it's all about thriving. How do we allow our people to thrive? Most importantly, our young people. And so just in closing, can I say one quote? Because I know my time is up. Is that right?
Yep.
It goes by fast. So this is from a student that I wanted to share with you today. That the Fab Lab has given me people to talk to help me find a sense of humor and to open 1,000 doors for me, because everything I have learned is amazing. It's been a place that I can go where it feels like everything is against me. When it feels like everything is against me, because I know there will be someone there for me. By 3rd grade, I was depressed and suicidal. The Fab Lab and CITC has helped me learn how to smile, and it's helped me keep away from drugs. So it's not only a great learning opportunity, this really is saving lives in our community.
Wow, that's beautiful. Let's see. Oh, great. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Blair from Detroit.
Afternoon, and I am going to stick with my notes, otherwise I'll be up here half an hour. And so many of the core roles of the Fab Lab will be represented very well by the fellow panelists, so that gives me the luxury of kind of zeroing in on one area of the work in Detroit that I wanted to kind of focus on. And this is a banner that we have up in the Fab Lab, which is intended to instigate. But one of the things that we focus on a lot is that we have challenges, needs, and opportunities that not only require us to tap the broadest range of intellectual capacity of the citizens that we have, not just accelerate a few, but tap into everyone's capabilities as gifts, but also to require the vast majority of the citizens to kind of know what direction everybody's trying to lean in. And so even if you're not working in the area, to understand what the concepts are, to be able to participate in this. But I guess first, I have my mandatory, here's our our lab-based programming. We do have community-based, we are a community-based Fab Lab in Detroit, independent from educational institutions, et cetera. We have a U.S. Department of Labor approved registered apprenticeship that incorporates digital fabrication. We've had the Fab Academy program, which is educational overlay of the Fab Lab Network, approved by the state as a workforce development funded opportunity. We have K-16 actually integration, and we've really focused on youth out of the educational mainstream, which has been gifted and talented youth and youth that have been considered at risk. And let me kind of take that high school linkage at a point of departure. Through working in the Fab Lab, we've had about 5 different groups of young folks who have been considered at risk in the city of Detroit, who have kind of come together, learned the technology, gone overseas to South Africa or Ethiopia, worked with local youth to actually develop and implement local solutions to needs that they had. And then bring some of that back and re-implement it in Detroit also. So given the ability of young folks to actually not just learn about things and study things, not just whiteboard things, but actually get your hands on something, come up with an idea, try to reduce it to practice, work with other people who are different from you, figure out what skills you have and what gifts that you can complement, and actually be able to create something that solves a problem is a tremendously therapeutic and transformative kind of opportunity. So the part of this that I wanted to really focus on is the ability to not make stuff, but to make better people. And I know that's a common theme kind of across the board, but you know, we've worked a lot with adults and young folks who do not see a pathway forward in the economy as it stands, or in the political structure as it stands, who are gaining the ability to understand that they cannot just fight against stuff they don't like, they cannot just advocate for things they do like, but they can actually do something locally about the needs that they see. And that's a huge component of what we see people really need in the city of Detroit. It's producing better citizens, it's producing entrepreneurs, but it's also changing conditions of the neighborhoods which break the intergenerational cycle of lock-in of despair. And so just the very possibility of being able to collaborate with someone from Peru or Barcelona through video conferencing in the Fab Lab Network to actually bring in expertise, thinking globally, actually reduce it to practice in a way that uses local materials that you have access to, that you don't have to ask permission for, and come up with a solution that people in your community look to you as an aspect and a creator as opposed to a risk, is something that's just hugely important in people's lives. And so I'm a propeller head, you know, I'm an engineer. I love geeking out on the Fab Lab stuff, but what's incredibly important to me is that folks who don't realize that they are interested in digital fabrication, and you don't tell them this is digital fabrication, have an ability to learn very high-tech skills in the context of actually solving problems that they care about, which causes them to figure out what they're good at, what their gifts are, which allows them to then have the motivation to spend the thousands of hours that it takes to get good at something, which then means their contribution to their community and their new human capital kind of asset, if you will. Not just for someone else's use, but for themselves, their family, and their local community kind of along with it. And so I assume you're standing up. Gradually means I'm about out of time. And so, again, I love to talk about the impact of Fab Labs, and specifically in community development. A lot of the kind of way we went about things in Detroit is being adopted through some other cities, kind of labeling it centers for community productions or community production centers. And it's, again, not geeking out on digital fabrication, although the STEAM stuff is absolutely great. It's about how can I identify a problem in the community, use design thinking to formulate a solution, and actually really do something about it, to kickstart a process of people developing agency to create their own solutions.
Thank you, Blair. Next we have Brent.
Hello, I'm Brent. I work for BakerRipley, and I'm the director of Fab Lab Houston. So Fab Lab Houston is unique in that it lives as a program within a larger community development organization that's been around for over 100 years and serves to make Houston a welcoming place for everyone. So within programs, there's adult education, workforce, immigration, and community centers, and the Fab Lab lives within our newest community center. It's been open a year. So during that year, leading up to that, I spent 2 years working with the community and meeting their leaders within the community and discovering and hearing about their aspirations and goals. And part of what makes BakerRipley a great organization to work for is that we focus on the strengths of the community and build on what's already working and supporting the leaders that are already there. So when we went to East Alding, which is an unincorporated community, if you look at a map, you would think it was Houston, but it's a little area that is county and is not privileged to have all of the city services that surround it. So these are the things that we heard from community members, and what led us to really seeing the need for a Fab Lab in this community center, a program that hasn't existed in any of our other community centers. So when we opened, we set ourselves ambitious goals with the support and ideas of those community members to serve students, entrepreneurs, community members, and educators. And we did what probably everyone in this room does. We developed tools to measure our success and to look at the things that we're doing. And we were really excited to see that our initial programs within this first year had great results. And coming out of formal education spaces, I was excited to see that it didn't stop here. This wasn't the moment that I sent them on to the next grade and patted myself on the back that we all passed our state standard test. We get to see them come back, and we get to see them grow, and not just grow themselves, but support the growth of the people around them. So this is a family that lives in the neighborhood, and the daughter came to one of our after-school programs. She loved it, and soon I got a call from her mother that said, "I've seen what she's doing, it's amazing." Her words were, "I didn't know she could do this, I want to do it. Can I do it?" And we're like, "Yeah, come on." So her daughter actually spent time working with her mother, teaching her these things, and what they're making here is centerpieces for her daughter's quinceañera in this community. We spend tons of money on our 15th birthday, and they've made things from these huge letters that go on the side of the dance floor that all of her family typically rent. She's now making an alphabet that she's renting to people, because once this event's over, they have nothing to do with them or places to store them. So there's people like this in the community, and this is one example of a ton of different families that it's not just a space that you typically see in school where a student gains access to technology, but the community saw a need that, hey, once summer hits, once school's out, our students lose access to the computer, lose access to the internet, to all these things, and the Fab Lab's helping fill that gap, and it's also helping students support their parents and support their peers that typically don't have access within the school system that is the traditional means for gaining access to these types of things.
Good. Melanie.
Hi, I'm Melanie. I'm from Baltimore. So I work for Baltimore City Government, but I also work partially for the city school system, and where we kind of bridge technology and urban agriculture and help students kind of use this Fab Lab mentality in creating businesses and doing entrepreneurship type things. And so really showing them how they can effectively use technology instead of, showing them, oh, this is how you code, or this is how you do all these other things. As you may know, Baltimore is like a very food desert heavy area. This is a map zoomed in Baltimore, and the blue circle, if you can see it, is where I'll focus the students in this presentation are in the school. And so one of the things that I focus on in the class, or in these classes, is for students to use the technology and use what they know about Baltimore to create solutions that they would want to focus on and that they know are relevant to Baltimore City. And so we've been able to do things through local support, and they actually got recognized by the mayor in doing one of their projects that I'll show in the next slide. So basically what the students did, we kind of showed them how they can use computer programming, use making, and kind of saying you don't have any set guidelines, you just kind of need to do something that you know is relevant for Baltimore. So they built this huge indoor farm that is partially climate controlled with computer programming and robotics. And so basically in doing this kind of building, making education into their class time, so these are high school students and we did this during their class time. I know a lot of times it's easier to do stuff after school, but I know specifically with these students, what we wanted to do was focus in this school and some other schools and community areas and to say, we want everyone to be exposed to this, we want access to everyone. And so everyone gets exposed, everyone is in this class, and you kind of have to do this no matter what. Which ended up being really good for them because everyone is working in. So they were able to build this indoor farm. We talked about open source technology, we talked about how they can apply this to real world challenges like food deserts. And so this holds about, I think, 400 plants in hydroponics, and then at the end we kind of cook with it and learn about the whole food cycle in general. Provide opportunities for entrepreneurship and community impact. So as we cook with it and as we learn about all these things, the students also do community surveys and ask about what do people know about technology, what do people know about the food climate, what do people know about agriculture, and then kind of build their own solutions. And so one of the things that they did that I'll talk about in a second is build a couple businesses where they had breakfast sandwiches that they would sell to the school, and that they also worked in a local food hall where they ran their own business for a whole weekend and made over $5,000, which is awesome for them. And so in those things, one of the things that I think was important to get them a little bit interested was to pay them for their work in that they were doing outside of traditional school. That kind of got them initially interested in saying, oh, this is something that I could do as a real-time job, this is something that I could do later on past high school. And then as they started doing more things and as they started making and getting interested in the technology and interested in other aspects of just what we've done in the classroom, they wanted to continue. Like in the restaurant that we did, the students would work shifts for like 10 hours because we're like, oh, you need to go home. It's been like 4 hours. Like, no, I can stay, I can like do all these things, I'm really having a good time. So that was really cool to see how the students grew and really wanted to get more involved with what they were doing. And then lastly, obviously what I'm talking about right here is one specific school, and I've done stuff, we're in 3 other schools and a community center, and how this is scaling is working with people in Baltimore City, working with partners in industry and people in Fab Labs who kind of are interested and know and hobby with technology and with makers education and maker mindset and Fab mindset in general, and kind of using that to expand what traditional education has to offer. So a lot of times we know that there are all these things that students have to do, but not a lot of opportunity for education to expand what they're doing, but partnering with outside organizations like Fab Lab and other places, this is a way to grow. And then really quickly, and so kind of connecting it back, students get to do stuff like making food, and this is their restaurant that they made, having a good time, and yeah, a lot of things, but thank you.
Okay, Tulsa.
Hello, my name is Nathan Pritchett, and I'm the Executive Director of Fab Lab Tulsa. We are a community-based Fab Lab, and we have an entire ecosystem of programming. We serve around 4,800 K-12 students and college students a year. We have about 403 members, and we also do programming and workforce and entrepreneurship and business. Today I want to talk about a few of those businesses, just give you an idea of what can happen when you make these tools and resources available to innovators and entrepreneurs. This first company is called Infinite Composite Technologies. They make composite pressure vessels. They came to our lab very early in their development stage, and yes, they are a high-tech company, but what they were needing at the time was they were needing to create different molds and dies to play with the different shapes of their canisters and their pressure vessels. So they came to the lab, they were able to play with these, they were able to do them very quickly, very efficiently, adapt them over several weeks until they finally got their final versions, and then they were able to go into production. They've been doing this for about 5 years now, and this summer they just got a NASA contract and grant to test to see how resilient their pressure vessels are against radiation, so that if they decide to use these when we go back to the moon or when we travel to Mars, how they'll fare. So it's a perfect example of what can happen. This is a company called Two Guys Bow Ties. It's a men's fashion accessory. They came to our lab with an idea. They used our CNC mill to start cutting shapes of exotic woods. They used the laser cutter to put different patterns and things into those ties. They also started doing micro manufacturing. So they were making 100 of these and then going to trade shows and markets across the US. Then something very interesting happened to them, which is a rapper wore one of their ties on a red carpet at the Kentucky Derby. And then they got picked up by Esquire. And then Shark Tank wanted them to come on. And then Damon John invested $150,000 in them. And so this is an example of a company that was able to then grow beyond our lab. And so they took that $150,000, bought their own shot bots, their own level log lasers, and set up shop about a half mile down the street from us. This is one of my favorite stories. This is a company called Grid, and this young man, his name is Avi. He gave an incredible TEDx talk while he was at the University of Tulsa about how every college student should start a business. He then had an idea for his own business based on the experience he had caring for his aging grandfather and how hard it was to manage his medications. And so he played with the idea of creating a smart pill box. He came into our lab, he used our 3D printer to start creating the different shapes of these different grids. He milled his own PCB boards, his own programming, created his own app. And then he was able to take that as his rapid prototype and take it to a manufacturer and have a more sophisticated version. So really what's awesome about this, both he and his partner Regina were named last year to Forbes 30 Under 30 for young makers and industry innovators. Just an amazing story, and they'll probably have another product after this. And then to show that they don't always work out, this is a company called Upleft. It's a better known company. Stephen served 2 tours in the Marines in Afghanistan. He was in charge of artillery units. The way he'll describe it is it's really important to know where you are and where the enemy is so you don't get shot. And so he had an idea to improve upon the rulers and types of things that they were using for positioning. So he came to our lab, he used a simple laser cutter to experiment with ideas, started sending these back to his former colleagues in the military to test and evaluate it. Went through several iterations of this until he finally got down to the last one that he liked. He ended up receiving a Spirit of Innovation Award during the Tulsa Startup Cup. Unfortunately, the company ended up failing after a while. It turned out that there wasn't anything that was patentable intellectually about it. And of course, it's very hard to ramp up from someone who's making 100 small prototypes to someone who's making 50,000, 100,000 to sell to the military, to NATO. And he also eventually just had to eat and pay his rent. But these ideas are worth trying. And hopefully these examples can kind of show you the economic development that's possible to a community when you make these tools and make these resources accessible and give entrepreneurs a chance to experiment with whatever ideas they have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. So I think Gloria and team might have the longest commute to get here. Phyllis had the shortest commute. If you look out the door, you can probably see your lab, Phyllis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me. Fab Lab DC is a freestanding independent lab located right here in the District of Columbia. We actually 2020 marks our 10th year being involved in the Fab Lab project. And it's been so satisfying to see the growth of the network. Here in DC, Fab Labs are now incorporated into both public schools, private schools, and now they're a part of our DC public library system. So we started out as a community Fab Lab offering events, workshops, speaker series, exhibitions. We just worked our heart out, getting the word out about what Fab Lab is and assisting others in getting them started. We were also serving as a model Fab Lab for leaders in government, industry, and education so they could come experience the lab firsthand to participate and see what we were talking about. In 2015, through a generous support of the Fab Foundation and their partners, we began to focus on K through 12 students and educators. We were able to offer after-school programming, summer programming, and professional development. Currently, we're continuing to design projects, and we're also in the process of designing a fellowship and residency program so that we can offer more immersive learning experiences. You've eloquently heard from my colleagues the transformative power of this project, personally, professionally, and collectively. The demand for this is, the interest and demand is so great from people of all ages that we as one lab could never keep up with the pull for this. So we're so pleased that it's growing in our city and beyond. This first slide is showing you a gathering of makerspace organizers, from across the U.S. We were invited during the past administration to come and meet with the Office of Science, Technology Policy to talk about challenges and how makerspaces and Fab Labs could help answer those challenges. And just to show you some of the flocking that happens to Fab Labs, these are students from the University of the District of Columbia in their fashion program, flocking to us when we first got started in the MIT Fab Lab that we were lucky to have.
The trailer.
The trailer, yes, the mobile Fab Lab. This is the response that we got when we set up a booth at the Mid-Atlantic TED Talk. And this is a corner of our lab during one of our after-school programs for elementary and middle school students when they designed and built the city of the future. Fab Labs need space, lots of space to spread out. Lastly, these are international visitors, recent visitors to the lab. We've worked closely with the State Department, USAID, lots of organizations to be an informal emissary to the Global Fab Lab project. And just by virtue of being here in DC, we get a lot of visitors, and it's been really satisfying. And really my hope today for our visit is that it conveys the impact that this can have, the opportunities that it can provide, and the inclusion that can happen. I think with the passage of this act into law, we can really continue to expand this and make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. Now, we, for a range of reasons we'll discuss, hope that legislation will pass, but we're not waiting for it to get started. And so it's designed as a public-private partnership, and I'm pleased to introduce Chevron to speak about it.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. My name is Janet Auer, and I'm the Manager of Education and Corporate Programs for Chevron. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've done and why we've done it, and give you a little bit of kind of what we've achieved to date. So in 2014, at the first White House Maker Fair, we announced a $10 million contribution to the Fab Foundation to put labs around the U.S., primarily where we had, where our employees live and work, so that we could be very involved in the planning as well as the execution of the labs. The first of the, we wanted to do 10 labs. I'll tell you a little bit, it turned into 15 labs. And the first one launched in Bakersfield, California in 2014, and the last lab was the Houston lab that Brent mentioned earlier. Our goal was STEM education focused, mostly to support K-12. The host sites, as we call them, that host the labs, range from community colleges, universities, high schools, community-based models. So it's very wide variety of host sites to support education. People asked us early on why Fab Labs, why this investment. I think hearing from everybody here today as to the why speaks more than I could ever about the why, but the critical thinking, problem solving, agency, the entrepreneur skills, all of those fed into our decision. Jobs for the future. A lot of the labs that we have are in rural areas, so access to high quality STEM education is a barrier for a lot of kids. And why not invest in high tech, high quality programs and projects that are accessible? And it's a platform for learning and innovation, play, create, explore. Again, all of those things that everybody here has talked about today was really why we decided to invest. And on this slide, you'll see the locations that we have labs in, which span all the way from California to Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, as well as DC and all over the US. Highlighting just a couple of examples of impact. The Intermediate Unit 1 here in Cole Center, Pennsylvania, extremely rural, extremely underserved community, not necessarily a diverse community in the sense of ethnical diversity, but in the sense of access and poverty levels are extremely high. And in Intermediate Unit 1, they serve a high population of special needs and social emotional learners. When they originally thought the high school kids, the alternative ed was going to be their primary audience, which it is, but they learned quickly that the social emotional, the kids with special education needs thrived in that environment. They have a comprehensive therapeutic emotional support Fab Lab program, and those are students that are in need of therapeutic type support, and they've learned some amazing lessons through that program, and they were featured in a recent article in Scientific American talking about all the great work that they've done. They've seen such a return on the investment that they've now put in additional Fab Labs, and they've also, they're building labs for other communities within their 3-county region. So really they've become a hub to help others do the work. And then on the left, on your right, Jackson County, Mississippi, they have a Fab Lab Ambassador program where they bring students in to be ambassadors within the lab. They recycle everything. And they also partner with an organization called Project Lead the Way, which is engineering curriculum, so that they are integrating what students are learning in their engineering classes into how to make it in the actual Fab Lab, and training teachers there as well. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about project metrics, keeping in mind that the first lab opened in 2014, the last one just opened in 2018, so a wide span of how long they've been open and who they've served. I won't go through all of these, but female population participation, 53%. I think that's something really interesting and exciting for us, being that a lot of times attracting and retaining females, especially in STEM, is very difficult. The funds leveraged, that was others that came in and saw what this is all about and contributed either funds or in-kind contributions. So talking about this act, the Network Act, people see the value and people will come if we build them. And finally, I'll just say that this is just what has happened in the last few years with a handful of labs. So imagine what can happen if there's these types of labs in every congressional district. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Jen. So when I would speak about this, I'd explain how anybody could make anything and think our work is done, and my brother Joel would say, no, that's when the work begins.
Thank you. My name is Joel Kutcher Gershenfeld, and myself and Sherry will be closing this out. In a sense, a bookend. Neil has given you the extraordinary technology frontier, and the question is, what's the social and institutional context to place it in? And what I put up here are 5 books. There's many others, but there's a growing consensus among scholars that we're at a historical inflection point, a point that represents a divide between an analog industrial era into a digital era. And I mention it for 2 reasons. First, there is evidence that the pace of change in this post-industrial era is accelerating dramatically. The Boys and Girl Clubs that you heard Representative Foster talk about took 50 to 100 years, along with political parties, trade unions, and other arrangements of the prior industrial era. We're now seeing in 5 to 10 years, institutional arrangements can form or collapse. So it's both good news and fearful news. The second reason for putting this here is that with the first 2 digital revolutions in our book, Neil, myself, and our other brother Alan co-authored, the first 2 digital revolutions, digital computation and digital communication, the unintended consequences of weaponized media and other kinds of unexpected and negative effects would have been easier to prevent if we had leaned in the late 70s and 80s when those technologies were taking shape. And part of the reason here with the 3rd digital revolution, digital fabrication, is now's the time to be asking questions and be thinking about the social systems that go with the technology. So with that in mind, we've done a bit of a thought exercise. You've heard from the different Fab Lab presentations the extraordinary way that they build digital literacy, design literacy, engagement, actual prevention against suicide and opportunities. My older son and I volunteered every Saturday for the first 3 years in the early 2000s at the first Fab Lab, and we saw those social effects. They're powerful and they're strong. But when Neil talked about the Fab Cities movement, it was something a little bit more, because they were talking about cities breaking their dependence on global supply chains and being more self-sufficient. So what we put up here is the consumer price index involves a basket of goods that are used for a typical urban household to purchase. You can see the percentages of what goes into that basket of goods. And the thought exercise is if you really want to build, in a sense, this concept of self-sufficient production, right now you can sometimes do tiny homes in a Fab Lab, you can sometimes do food and hydroponics, as we've heard. You get a lot of emphasis on education, recreation, and other kinds of things, but the real thought exercise is what will it take for communities in all of these categories to build self-sufficiency? And I would make 2 hypotheses. One, and you probably could sense it from the presentations, is that the self-sufficiency will happen quicker in urban areas and remote rural areas that are underserved by the existing institutions where there's need. And there's also fewer things in the way. The second hypothesis, you heard a lot in all the presentations about youth, and we predict that there'll be a generational shift where youth who have access to a Fab Lab in their community, who are setting up new households, will want to design and make what they need as compared to people who already have a household in place. So there may be a generational shift that goes with this. But I want to push our thinking even further. Fab Labs can be in community centers and libraries, in K-12 schools, in community colleges, in a variety of settings. And what you see on the right here, on the left, is all of the US congressional districts. And of course, the Fab Bill says there should be at least 1 Fab Lab or digital capability for fabrication in every congressional district. And I want to suggest that that's not just a technical question, it's also a social one. That this network of folks need to come together. Picture 2 very different scenarios. One future of digital fabrication is you have distributed Amazon service centers that have rapid prototyping facilities that recreate the current economic system and multiply it with digital fabrication. A very different vision is all of these stakeholders are aligned together in a way that creates local self-sufficient production, educational opportunities, in a way that actually represents a different kind of future. Two last thoughts. First, when the first Fab Lab started forming, Neil and I had a conversation to say, I have been doing a lot of work with industry around chartering, labor management partnerships and other things, and said, you really ought to have a charter. And so Neil drafted a charter, and it's actually a very good charter in the sense that it captures a number of important things about open sharing and other aspects of the ecosystem. But what I want to say, it's good.
The network drafted a charter.
A lot of people contributed to it, and it's still in wide use. But I want to say it's good, but not good enough. If you think about what this bill is chartering, it's chartering productive capability at communities, at regions, and nationally that will take a whole social ecosystem that needs to build on the charter, and in a sense, think of what is the charter for a national Fab Lab network as the bill calls for. The last thought that I'll share with you is that the digital technologies that underlie digital fabrication have as one of their core features modularity, bits, bytes that are assembled or disassembled. They have had a destructive impact in some ways in our social systems. So what used to be careers and jobs are now tasks. What used to be industries and stores are now transactions. What used to be families and communities are isolated individuals. That fragmentation is not accidental, it's the logic of digital. But digital also has the ability to create new connections where people can add together and create new building blocks, essentially, to construct new social systems. And so the final thought that I'll leave you with is that we really have the opportunity to take these elements of the Fab ecosystem and assemble them in ways that truly build a new society, that take advantage of the modularity, which makes the Fab Foundation and makes the Fab Academy and the others work, but do so with the connective social tissue that we also need. Thank you very much.
As Joel describes it, machines that make machines need organizations that make organizations.
And institutions that make institutions.
Right. So Sherry will wrap up and then we'll do Q&A.
Hello, I'm Sherry Lassiter. I'm the president and CEO of the Fab Foundation. And in that role, I have the great honor and pleasure of working with, trying to support and provide resources for this incredible community that you're meeting today. So Fab Foundation was founded in 2009 to support the growth of the global Fab Lab Network. And we do that by providing or democratizing access to the tools. Is this working? Yeah. To the tools of digital fabrication for innovation and invention, pretty much allowing anyone, anywhere, to make almost anything that they can imagine. And so the Fab Foundation, we build Fab Labs, we build networks of Fab Labs, we support community building or regional and national networks of Fab Labs, like the National Fab Lab Network. We also provide programs, educational programs, and or ways for the community to collaborate around social impact. So it's a very broad base of.
There we go.
There it is. Okay. So what you're seeing here is we have maybe more than around 2,000 labs across 120 some countries in the world, but this is the United States. So this is we have about 225 Fab Labs, which represents about 30% of the congressional districts in the United States. But as you can see, there are places that there are deserts that don't have this sort of infrastructure, and there are places that just have a very few labs. And what we would really like to see through the National Fab Lab Network Act is that we seed a Fab Lab in every community for education, for business incubation and entrepreneurship, as well as for social impact. And so that's what the act is about, and that's what we want to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the .edu, the .org, and the .com. Through the Fab Academy, which you've heard about from Neil and a few others, this is kind of a repackaged MIT class in digital fabrication, but we've repackaged it now for the global network. So we have about 70 labs, 70 labs in probably like 50 different countries who connect to Professor Gershenfeld and other experts in the network by video conference once a week, and then peer students work with mentors in their Fab Labs to matriculate over the course of the course, right? So, and what we're seeing emerge from this are new businesses as well as new economic opportunities for workforce. Digital fabrication is growing so quickly, both in industry and education and in community, that there is a tremendous demand for this kind of talent, this kind of cross-disciplinary talent around the world. So we're again having to invent a platform, Fab Economy, through which we can match potential employers with Fab Academy graduates who have this interesting cross-disciplinary skill set. For the K through 12 community, we have this amazing project called Scopes, Scaling a Community of Practice for Educators in STEM, whereby this is funded by Chevron and as well as the GE Foundation. And what we're doing is we're building curricular activities as well as professional development for teachers who are just starting to use digital fabrication as an accelerator for STEM learning in the classroom. And so that's a lovely project, and it's free for teachers all around the world. On the .com side, we have, as I noted, through Fab Academy, we're starting to see really interesting projects emerge. Combined, when you combine these really interesting projects with crowdfunding, we're able to see incubation of new businesses around the world. So one example from Fab Academy is the Aqua Pioneers project, whereby they were creating not only kits for building your own aquaponics systems in your community or in your household, but also the service of making food in a sustainable way for, say, corporate social responsibility. Form Labs is an internationally recognized 3D printer manufacturer that emerged out of the Fab Lab at MIT, as did Ultimaker, which is another internationally recognized 3D printing manufacturer that emerged out of one of our labs in Utrecht. And then one project that I really wanted to point you toward, in Puebla, Mexico, they're using the Fab Lab that's situated at the Ibero Catholic University to incubate 350 family micro enterprises. This is in a community that's extremely impoverished, and there's very, very little economic opportunity. And through digital fabrication, they are supporting the incubation of about 350 family micro enterprises. So it's tremendous impact in that particular community, and a model we would like to replicate. And then on the .org side, we help form networks, programs, and projects across the network. We try to follow where the network wants to go. We don't push on the network, but what we should be doing. The network's very interested in humanitarian aid, and so there are projects with Terre des Hommes and Field Ready, which are both very small humanitarian aid organizations, but doing really interesting and good work in communities in crisis. We're also working with the Crown Prince Foundation in Jordan, as well as the Red Cross, the Kenyan Red Cross. And then you've heard a little bit about Fab Cities. This is another project that the community is coalescing around. So it's really about how do you be locally productive but globally connected. It's basically a research project over 40 years to try to develop sustainable manufacturing and living practices in a city. And at the end of 40 years, you hopefully will have a playbook that will help you as a city live in a sustainable way and manufacture in a sustainable way. Also starting to embrace UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have a project that was recognized kind of as visionary in the Amazon on that front. And again, we are having to develop platforms to support this community. So we have Fab Labs IO, which I think Neil talked about, whereby we can bring together the community and give them a platform for collaboration. And last but not least, all of this is through public-private partnerships, the National Fab Lab Network being a great example of how we want public-private partnerships to work as we seed the nation with these labs. So Chevron was our first really important partner in this. We also work with Dassault Systems SolidWorks, who helps us build Fab Labs around the world and provides these professional software packages for free for all Fab Labs. And then we have the GE Foundation, through which we are trying to build infrastructure for Boston Public Schools. And last but not least, we're working with the National Governors Association on the Future Workforce Now project, which is really about how do you develop a continuous lifelong learning system, how do you align policy and create new policy that will create a future-ready workforce, a workforce that is ready for the disruptive technologies that we face. So if you have any questions or want to know more, let us know. Thank you.
We've gone a bit long, so rather than lining everybody up with just a bit of remaining time, why don't we just open it up to questions from anybody, speakers included for anybody. So, questions, comments? And let me ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dylan Johnson with Congressman Frank Lucas's office. So as far as, I think there's a good diversity of different Fab Labs and missions shown here. Who are some of the most important partners in your local communities that you've worked with, each of you? And that's maybe a long answer, but.
Good question. Partners in the communities to make it possible.
Well, in Detroit, it was kind of strangely Department of Human Services, child welfare, mental health, juvenile justice, as kind of a therapeutic component for helping people develop an agenda and develop a kind of transitional path into having a productive life agenda.
And let me underscore something, two important things from what Blair said. One is, for the sustainability for the financial model in a Fab Lab, a common mistake is to assume you make something in the lab and then you sell the thing you made. There are lots of benefits of the lab that have real monetary value that come from having made something, not the thing that you made. And one of the things Blair has been really good at is showing, for example, if you take at-risk youth in the lab, you take them through it and then you measure life outcomes, you're delivering better outcomes compared to the social services on offer in a way that you can really measure and quantify, and it has a real financial impact.
I can build on that. So I was a dean at the University of Illinois, and we launched a Fab Lab, and the university wanted to make it closed and just open to the university. We said no, it needs to be open to the community. And it turns out the Boys and Girls Club, the ministers from the local churches, there were a lot of different community groups that immediately wanted to do Saturday morning classes and other kinds of programming. And more than half the folks now in that lab are coming in from the community, and it's actually become a town-gown bridge. But a lot of it is at-risk folks who, for whom this makes it, truly a life-saving difference.
Other partners, Gloria, the question was partners for, who are the important partners for your lab?
For me, that's what I think.
Sure.
So I'd say that first and foremost, it's the people that we serve are our most important partners. When we first invested in the Fab Lab, opened our doors, we had an issue of, do we take this investment internal to what we do, or do we open it for the entire community, and how do we staff it? And so as we work through that entire process, I think that we've got to a place of building enough infrastructure and capacity so that we can continue to open our doors to the wider community. As I said, we are taking the Fab Lab investment and working with very small rural communities across our state of Alaska. Over the next 3 years, we'll add additional 10 communities, and we've taken it to all of the local schools, which serves thousands and thousands of students through our mobile lab. So I would say the people of our community first, and then the education systems.
Can I just really quickly add so Chevron, we funded a lot of the labs, but it wasn't about just funding them and saying, here, go build a lab, because we know that that's not sustainable. And so we held a series of community workshops in every place that we went and invited in, the organizations invited in decision makers, community members, other nonprofits, as wide as far to design the lab around what the community needed. So then that created kind of the buy-in and the future sustainability for the lab. So it wasn't done in a vacuum, and it wasn't done as Chevron or this lab's doing this. How does it benefit the whole community? I think that's the key, that's the common thread that's ran through all of this, is it's very much a community effort.
More questions, comments?
Well, I'd just like to add that as a community lab that got started from nothing, the most important aspect were the community members, individuals who were willing to donate their talent, their time, and resources to get it going. Because when you're so new and you're not proven, typical systems don't want to take a risk necessarily. Of course, now we're in a different place where we have the data and the proof positive. But in any community, I agree that it's the users, it's the people you'll be serving who need to, step up and take a station.
Although I'd say the only real labs we see that fail are monocultures. That the labs that succeed do nonprofit, for-profit, community, infrastructure, small business, big business. It's in the ecology of all of them. The ones that struggle are a monoculture and don't have the benefits of a community.
I'd also say that the labs respond to their own needs and interests, to their community's needs and interests. So the stakeholders in each community, outside of the initial usership will be a little bit different. And each lab, as a result, is very, very different and really reflects the values and the needs and interests of that community. So.
And building on that, I think specifically in Baltimore, there are Fab Labs and maker spaces kind of in the main areas of the city, but a lot of what this is about in Fab Labs in general is like to create access and equity in tech literacy and tech in general. So a lot of the people will go to schools or go to other programs and help out with stuff, but those, like one of the schools that I highlighted, like there isn't a Fab Lab in their community for them to work with. And so like the school's like, oh, can we maybe like make part of one in our school? And so part of what this, I think, can add substantially to all the underserved communities is to say like, here is something that you can work with and that you can kind of like grow up with as well, instead of needing to like go to the center of the city. And I don't think that this is true for every single Fab Lab, but I know specifically in some places.
More questions, comments from, including speakers? Anybody? So can you introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Jones. I'm with the Tech Rich Girls. I represent the DC office. It's nice to see everyone. Question. I'm more so curious about the more of your numbers as far as your girls, your young girls, tracking their career paths, numbers as to where you started when not Tech Labs, my organization, Fab Labs, when they started in the school or in the community, and the attraction of the girls, just more so numbers around.
So go back to that picture, yeah. So I took this picture in 2003. Ginger was then about coming into Saturday Morning Girls Club at the South End Technology Center. She's now an engineering student in college. And, it's obviously just one story, but Mel King, who was really the champion leading that lab, we would help out with the Saturday Morning Girls Club. And one day he said, well, Friday night, why don't you come to this community dinner at Tent City? And so I did. And he introduced me to all these women, and he said, you need to understand that these are the moms that make sure their daughters are going to the Saturday Morning Girls Club, and that's how it really happens. And so there's a whole social system by which, a girl gets exposed to STEM and ends up, as an engineer in college.
But something I'd add to that, I want to ask you about numbers, but something I'd add to that is we created the Fab Academy, and we created the Scopes problem. That wasn't our core competence, but it was to fill a void. That we have kids like this show up, get empowered, and then fall off a cliff. They go into schools where they knew more than their teachers. They go into jobs that were tedious. And we found we had to invest a lot of effort in trying to create the career paths for them. But I'm curious if anybody can say anything about measurements of girls through labs and outcomes.
I would say overall, we've always been probably 55-60% female in terms of initial participation. but from a longitudinal perspective, you can kind of see the headwind, because it's natural for kind of guys to be encouraged to continue in the technical area. And there's a lot of whispering in the ear about, you sure you want to do this and the like. So you can kind of see over a period of time that, you know, when crises occur, people kind of do what people recommend they should do in order to do something kind of safe and the like. And so women tend to bail out at a higher frequency than the guys have, from what we've seen with the folks who participated with us.
Janet, do you understand?
Yeah, I would just say, so as I showed, our over 50% in the Chevron lab. But I think it's one tool in kind of the toolkit to support girls. Tech Bridge being another, they still need support and role models and curriculum. But if this is the hook to keep them interested, because they can use it's an applied way to use math and engineering for something that's personal to them. It's enough to keep them within the pipeline. So this combined with other supports and families and that, I think is, but it's, the reason that we like it so much, and I think, again, everyone's talked about this, is it's individualized. It's not about what you make, it's about the process you get there, but it's also about, I can do whatever interests me, whatever's relevant to me, whatever's relevant to my community. It's not kind of cookie cutter, you have to make X. So that's where I think the power really comes into this type of learning.
There's also been conversations within our lab amongst young girls and women of all ages about recreating or creating new opportunities outside the current tech culture. Because that's another reason why women don't go forward, because even once they get there, they're like, I don't want to be here. And so creating openings and new opportunities through entrepreneurship and building networks and having supporters.
So I'd say out of the 2,000 students that we work with on an annual basis, that's probably 55% girls. But on the flip side, working with a population that's looked at as marginalized, a lot of our young Native men have extremely high dropout rates. So we are really trying to think about how do we make investments that connect these young men to hope and to their potential. And what I have a story that I love to tell is that we had a Cussbucks sewing class in the Fab Lab, and the Cussbucks are traditional garb. And these macho young guys showed up, and they're like, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And the teacher said, yes, you're going to do it because this is what you're going to learn, you know, and laid out the process. And this young man, he sewed a Cussbuck, and he put LED lights into this traditional garb. And he had a wedding to go to that weekend, and so he danced for 14 hours all lit up. But I tell that story because I think it's really important to not only think about how we support women in this career pathway, but also when we work with marginalized communities and young men who are really struggling to find their way, that this is an incredible investment for them.
Yeah, a variant of that story is one of the leaders in Latin America in the Fab Labs in Peru, who's made a career out of this. He grew up in the Amazon jungle, and as he described it, there were three career choices: farmer, soldier, or terrorist. And he picked none of the above. And he's used the Fab network to create an alternative career path that just wasn't available to him, and become a real leader. Questions, comments?
Okay. Kate Stoll with the MIT Washington office. I had a question if you had examples of co-creating curricula with community colleges and Fab Labs, and if you could share a little bit about one of those examples or generally.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So some of the most successful Fab Labs are in Rust Belt community colleges. It started years ago at Lorain County Community College in Ohio, where through like a speaking program I came in and gave a talk. And kids in the room, adults in the room said, hey, how come we can't do that? And then there was a retiring English teacher who said, I'll make it happen. And so he carved out a little lab in the community college, and then it grew to a bigger one and a bigger one, and now it's become one of the major programs in the community college. The same thing happened at Century City Community College, where it became a little program, then a bigger one, then it became one of the focal things that they organized the school around. And so there have been a number of these cycles of, in each case there's a strong leader, a stakeholder, who wasn't institutionally put in this position but believed in it. It grew, it got traction, and then the whole kind of community college reorganized around it. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I would say also that each of these locations participated in Fab Academy, and so they kind of take that model, and they've taken that model and they've developed a digital fabrication associate's degree around it. And so so they very much taken the pedagogy from us, right, and integrated it into their pathways, right?
Yeah. And again, yeah, this has gone through like 5 cycles of growth, and now it's become like one of the organizing principles of the
yeah, it started out as 100 square feet, and it's now over 10,000 square feet. It's really kind of exciting.
Yeah. And yeah, something to underscore is this is as much social as technical engineering. Everybody wants innovation and a knowledge economy, and then proceeds to do everything possible to prevent it. To lock everything down in the ground. And the bright inventive, these labs end up as being places of refuge for bright inventive people. I describe MIT's core competence as a safe place for strange people. And I really mean that. It's really sort of culturally what makes it work, and that's really what driving these labs is. It's the technology, but it's a place for people like that. Let's see, we're up to 1:30. Any final questions, comments? Just logistically, it's probably safe. This is in judiciary, right? Yeah, so it's probably safe. Judiciary committee might have a few things on their plate right now. Docket. So there might not be near-term progress with the judiciary committee. But the bill is queued up. In this cycle, a lot of work went into redrafting it. And I mean, just to quickly skim, from the first draft, it's really been clarified to explain the goals, carefully define what is a Fab Lab, not by membership, but just what are the capabilities that make it a Fab Lab. Define the goals, which is really boils down to universal access, and then chartering it as a public-private partnership. So I think it's nicely queued up. In a pre-meeting we had, we agreed we're going to try to set up a platform for places to opt in. In particular, you can see the big Fab deserts, to create a platform to identify a need, and then help use that to help motivate the bill, but help start moving towards filling that need. Okay.
Say thank you.
Final thoughts? Give me just pause for a minute. Final thoughts from anyone? Moment of silence to digest.
Neil, I want to thank you and your leadership for all of the work that you've done around this, along with Sherry. I know it's a lot of heavy lifting, and in addition to everything else you're doing and how you're changing the world. So, thank you. So I want to end with, it's such a pleasure to come to a session like this and hear the stories. We did this once for the Senate, now for the House. I keep sort of nodding and saying, I didn't know that. Wow, that's cool. And seeing it all lined up really is remarkable. And so that's why it's so important that we have this good recording. And we'll share this recording for companies, for representatives, for offices, to get to have this briefing of what this is all about. So thank you all for the effort to come in, and success to all of us.